Hello and welcome to the TID Water and Power Podcast. I'm your host, Constance Anderson, and on this month's episode, we're discussing the district's regulating reservoirs. Unlike Don Pedro, which has a storage capacity of more than 2 million acre-feet, TID's regulating reservoirs are more like ponds, storing just a couple hundred acre-feet. However, despite their relative size, they are crucial to the district's efforts to modernize and increase efficiency within our more than century-old irrigation system. A little later in the episode, I'll be joined by Water Distribution Department Manager Mike Kavarian to discuss various elements and operations of the regulating reservoirs. Then, in part 2 of this episode, I sit down with Senior Civil Engineer Matt Hazen and Construction and Maintenance Department Manager Chris Hardin to discuss the in-house design and construction of these projects. But first, I'm joined by TID's Chief Operating Officer, Brad Koehn, to discuss the history and benefits of these projects. Brad, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so I know you've been with us on an episode of the podcast before, but for our listeners who maybe haven't caught up on all of the past episodes, would you give us a little bit about your background?
Sure. So I am a licensed civil engineer and land surveyor, and most of my experience actually comes from the private sector. But I did have the opportunity and pleasure to join the district in 2011 in the civil engineering department. From there, I think it was 2017, I moved up to the power supply area as the assistant general manager, and then was appointed the chief operating officer in 2020, and that's the current title I hold.
Excellent. Very good. All right. So before we dive into the district's 2 regulating reservoirs, I want to lay some groundwork for our listeners. What is a regulating reservoir, and how is that different than, say, other reservoirs like Don Pedro?
So in the most basic sense, Don Pedro does have ties to the regulating reservoirs that we're talking about currently. And that simplistic tie is that it does store water for a use at a later time. The difference between the regulating reservoirs we're talking about in Don Pedro, one, obviously the size. These are much smaller in nature. But secondly, the Don Pedro, it is bridging the gap from supply and demand from a hydrological condition versus more operational differences in supply and demand. As an example, the regulating reservoirs in the lower system are bridging the gap between the supply that's released from Turlock Lake and the demand that exists on farm. And in many cases, the travel time from Turlock Lake to that on farm is 24 hours or more. And so you can picture that that's quite a feat to be able to match that supply to the farmer's demand perfectly. And although our WDOs do an excellent job in scheduling that, it still always has variability in that supply versus demand. These regulating reservoirs, it's the prime benefit of them is they are a restarting point in mid-system, in our lower system, to be able to capture when we're strong in the system, where supply exceeds demand, and then provide for the shorts in the system downstream when we are when supply is less than the demand on farm. Okay. And so that's just one of the benefits. I'm sure we'll get into others, but the main benefit is restarting the system and reducing that travel time from Turlock Lake, which in many cases, like I said, is over 24 hours.
And like you said, our water distribution team does a great job of scheduling out water for the growers as they make requests for water. But sometimes there is a little bit extra water in the system. Sometimes it comes up a little short at the end of the system, and that's kind of where these regulating reservoirs come into play. Why is it so important to capture that excess flow when we have more water in the system than has been requested on farm?
When we are strong in the system, it usually kicks off our water distribution team to try and find a home for that water when they know that they have more water than they have scheduled. And in many cases, they do a great job and they kick off orders earlier and they utilize that water. But in every case, we can't always make a home for that water, and we do often spill out the ends of our system. And so the benefit of these regulating reservoirs is it captures that for a release later and then saves water ultimately all the way up into Don Pedro.
Okay, great. Yeah, because in a gravity-fed system, once that water comes out of Turlock Lake, it's got to go somewhere. Okay. So last month, the district completed the Ceres main regulating reservoir, which is actually the second regulating reservoir built by TID, along with the Lateral 8 regulating reservoir. So let's get into these now, starting with Lateral 8. What can you tell me about the Lateral 8 regulating reservoir project?
The Lateral 8 regulating reservoir has been looked at for decades within TID, and one of the main reasons why is because of its location. There are very few locations within the district that have two main laterals that come together at a point where they actually touch. And Lateral 7 and Lateral 8 have this one location where the laterals come together and then they bifurcate after that. And that location has always been looked at as an ideal location because you could put a regulating reservoir there that affects not just one lateral, but two. And so that specific property was owned by the Hillmore County Water District, and they had moved their operations to another site, and that site became available for purchase. And we negotiated that purchase and built the regulating reservoir in 2015 as a pilot.
Okay.
It was an unlined regulating reservoir that was 29 acre-feet, and that was built in 2015. And really the purpose of doing a pilot, we knew that the benefits existed in concept, but really wanted to prove that that conceptual benefit existed in reality. And we wanted to have an operating season where we knew that we would operate it this way. It would save water. There wouldn't be any unintended consequences. And so that was a real reason for piloting this Lateral 8 regulating reservoir in 2015.
Okay. And then I understand it didn't take long having that pilot program in play to realize the benefits and that we wanted to expand that project.
Yes, it worked very well. All of our operations staff sang its praises. It gave them so much flexibility. It increased level of service. Lateral 8 and Lateral 7 are significantly distanced from Turlock Lake, and so their level of service was probably less than the average level of service in the district just because of the distance from the supply. And so level of service increased, flexibility increased, moving water between 7 and 8, etc. And the other big thing we learned from this unlined pilot was that the seepage was significant. And in many cases, groundwater recharge is a benefit. But in the situation where you're trying to save water, and especially in this location, we already had what I would consider high groundwater in this area, and we're also very close to the river. And so this wasn't a location where we wanted seepage. And in fact, in many cases, it could harm some local crops around us if we raised the water level too high. And so we learned that seepage was significant in this area, up to 25% of the water put in left. Okay. And so you can see that's kind of a conflicting objective there.
Sure.
And so we recognized quickly that we did feel already that we were going to have to line the larger project, but this just solidified the fact that we need to line the reservoir to decrease that seepage.
Okay. So you mentioned the original pilot project was how big in size?
29 acre-feet.
29 acre-feet. And then when that was expanded, what is now the total footprint of Lateral 8?
130 acre-feet is the capacity over a 25-acre parcel.
Okay, very good. What was the cost to build this project?
So the full cost of Lateral 8 was $5 million. Like I said, is also fully lined with concrete. There was a lot of analysis that went into what type of liner to choose, clay, poly liner, etc. And ultimately, the best bang for the buck for our customers was concrete lining.
Now, you mentioned that it was easy to see early on even that the benefits that you had hoped this pilot project would bring were there. And I would imagine that was even more so once you had the fully built out lateral 8 regulating reservoir. Can you tell us what some of those like specific takeaways were?
Yeah, we had a modeled savings of about 9,000 acre-feet a year savings. And it's a tough number to calculate because it's highly variable on the type of water year, what available water the farmers have that year, how much pumping occurs locally. So I can't tell you exactly what the number is, but it has been higher than 9,000 every year since we've had it.
Wow, that's fantastic. And since you mentioned pumping in the area, what kind of an effect has the regulating reservoir had on groundwater pumping? That's
another one of the benefits of the overarching regulating reservoir concept is we've been focusing on water savings, and we've talked a little bit about level of service to our customers. But the two other categories that can't be missed are reduction in groundwater pumping and water quality. And really those go hand in hand, because typically when you're pumping water into our system, the quality isn't as good. There's salts in the water, and it ends up degrading the quality ultimately in our canal system. And so by providing a surface water solution to a lot of these downstream parcels, it reduces the district's reliance on groundwater pumping, and therefore on the same side increases water quality.
All right, great. The reservoir was also designed and built in-house by TID staff. Is that right?
It is. That is something that I think I'm super proud of our staff, and it's not something that I've heard exists in other agencies like it exists here. And what I mean by that is that in-house ability and in-house expertise to be able to fully design a project like this, and then even more so construct something fully in-house with our staff. And again, we learned a lot on the Lateral 8 project. That was another benefit of having that pilot. And I'm sure Chris Hardin will get into it later about some of the things that we developed and some of the technologies that we implemented, like the roller screed, and the ability to not only just build it in-house, but build it efficiently and more competitive than the outside market. And our customers win.
Excellent. Very good. And I'm not even going to make you describe what a roller screed is. I'm going to save that question for later. Chris. Yeah. Okay, so let's go back to the Lateral 8 pilot project for just a second. Where did that concept first originate, the whole idea of building a regulating reservoir?
It's hard to say. We've had lots of modernization plans in the district. One in particular that I'm familiar with is one that was done in the early 2000s that really was, we had an outside consultant looking at our system and answering the question of how can we more efficiently deliver water to our customers and spill less, save more, spill less. And the concept there was, let's create these, what they called at the time, super highways of a canal system, which would be defined as our Ceres main canal and our Turlock main canal. And these superhighway concepts would be having the drops automated throughout that whole system to where they talk to each other so they can expediently deliver water when necessary and pull back when necessary. But the key component to these superhighways is having a regulating reservoir tied to them so that they can provide to a supply point and draw from a supply point. And these are a key component to, there's hundreds of flavors of modernization and automation for our canal system, but the one common denominator is these regulating reservoirs.
Interesting. Okay. So you've had a consultant out, you've talked about this, theoretical superhighway for water. What finally kind of flipped the switch on going forward with the pilot project and kind of putting that into play?
The one thing that stands out in my head is the property coming available.
Okay.
And, which really kicked us off on, I know we have other ways of purchasing and acquiring property. But in this case, the property became available and we started negotiating with Hillmar County Water District. And, I can't take away from the board's decision to fund the project and make funds available. These aren't cheap projects. They have a long-term return. And the board listened to us and said, yes, let's do it. Okay. And we kicked it off and made it happen.
Obviously these regulating reservoirs are used year round, regardless of the type of water year we're having. But does it come in is it more beneficial during a low water year or a drought year versus a high water year? Or are there just different ways that they're used?
They're beneficial in every year, just like you said, but they become exceptionally beneficial in a less than average water year. The scarcity of water leads to us having an objective of spilling next to nothing out of the ends of our system. And that without these, that is very difficult. We have ways to do it that usually affect level of service, meaning we hold the water levels lower. We push out schedules to where it's a little bit longer to get your water. We don't make big swings in the water level throughout the canal system. So there are ways to do it, but these regulating reservoirs take it to another level. It provides that supply mid-system to be able to capture them so we can keep levels of service high and decrease the spills out the end of our system. So they become much more valuable in a less than average water year.
Sure, absolutely. Okay, let's switch over now and talk about the newest regulating reservoir, the Ceres Main Regulating Reservoir. What can you tell us about that?
Well, it just got finished and was filled with water, I want to say, about 2 weeks ago. So it's extremely exciting to kick off the largest reservoir in our fleet. And it is 220 acre-feet capacity. It's over a footprint of 36 acres. It cost $10 million to build. And I want to caveat that with we were successful in getting a $2 million Bureau of Reclamation grant. So that brought that price down to $8 million. And that was a huge savings to our customers. And this regulating reservoir is estimated or modeled to save 10,000 acre feet a year. But following the lead from Lateral 8, that will likely be exceeded.
Wow.
It is in another critical location where the Ceres Main comes together with lower Lateral 3. And it really, we were adding up the other day about how many laterals it could affect. And it's funny, you just keep looking, well, what about that? Yep, actually we could make this operational change and it could affect that lateral as well. So it has a tremendous ability to affect how the district delivers water in most of our lower laterals.
Wow. So whereas Lateral 8, a little bit smaller and is primarily affected by two laterals, 7 and 8, this one a little bit bigger and, like you said, has many more implications as to the various laterals that can be affected in a positive way.
It does.
From this regulating
again,
reservoir.
all the same benefits too, which is water savings, level of service, reduced pumping, and water quality.
Okay, very good. So when we were talking about Lateral 8, you mentioned that project, the full build out, was concrete lined. What about Ceres Main Regulating Reservoir?
We found the exact same or very similar soil conditions there, and it is in the western side of our system, the lower lateral side of our system, which does typically have groundwater that's higher than the average in our system. Same exact reasoning of do not want to detriment any local farm ground with raising the groundwater levels because of that. And again, it's this conflicting objective of trying to save water and provide it for the future, in a surface water condition. And so really the same justification existed with the Ceres Main as it did with Lateral 8. And so it is also completely concrete lined.
Makes sense. And then going back to when you were talking earlier about the superhighway, so these regulating reservoirs are part of the larger vision for TID's irrigation system. tell us a little bit more about that. So we've got the superhighway of water, and then what other sort of factors play into creating this?
So I would describe the vision, and again, it will be a long-term vision as we have 250 miles of canal. Nothing is going to be done quickly. Again, I've mentioned this is a gravity system, was built as a gravity system, and we're trying to make a gravity system do things that it doesn't naturally do, which is spill out the end of our system. And so, kind of trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. But we've been very successful with automation. We will continue to automate drops throughout our system. One thing I haven't mentioned that was tied to the Lateral 8 project and the Series Main Regulating Reservoir project is this concept of total channel control.
Okay.
And it is kind of goes hand in hand with these new reservoirs and automates the drops downstream so that when they recognize that they are either long or short, they talk to each other and either deliver water out of the reservoir to feed that short, or if they're long, they close up the system and push water back into the reservoir.
Wow.
So it really makes, I don't want to say that the reservoirs wouldn't be beneficial without that system, but it really takes it to another level and drives that water savings number up significantly.
Okay.
So that's one of the arms of this vision for the system. Really the objective or what the vision looks like is a closed system. And when I say closed system, it is we don't spill out the ends of our system.
Okay.
And so regulating reservoirs are a component of that. We have, again, I don't want to give away maybe another podcast, but we have another project that's called the Main Canal Automation Project that we also received a $2 million grant for. And it is the wide section of our canal, 100-foot wide main canal section. And these are massive gates, massive drops. And it's automating those drops below Turlock Lake to be able to talk to each other and push water up to Turlock Lake. So, again, there's a lot of pieces necessary to successfully create a closed system. But the regulating reservoirs are a huge piece. These automated drops, total channel control, these are also pieces. And with the board's approval and joining us with this vision, we will march down to a point in the future where we will not spill out of the end of our system.
Wow. So you're literally pushing water against gravity and making use of every drop.
Gravity versus us, and we're winning.
Excellent. So while we're kind of talking about some of these bigger vision, exciting projects, the Series Main Regulating Reservoir is the specific location is adjacent to another exciting district project. Tell us about that.
Project Nexus is a solar project that is going to be installed over the canals that really completely surround the Series Main Regulating Reservoir. And there are two areas that Project Nexus will be being built. One is the area I just discussed, and it is the smaller span section. And then we'll also be piloting a large span section over the main canal, which is, again, 100 feet wide or so. Mm-hmm. So completely different structures, completely different designs. But we will be installing the narrow span section around the Series Main Regulating Reservoir and then that wide span on the main canal. And really the benefits of Project Nexus are obviously it's renewable energy generation, which fits directly into TID's goals for carbon free, as well as it is superior in cost-wise of buying property within the district, within TID's balancing authority. Our property values are extremely high. They're also superior agricultural production. And so taking hundreds of acres out of production for solar farms is something that's cumbersome at best. And so this concept is we already have the canal system. It's already necessary for maintaining and accessing our canal system. And so the concept is let's put it over the top of our canals. There's a water savings component as it shades the water and could create some water savings because of the reduced evaporation. And we're really excited to see how much it decreases our aquatic growth in the irrigation system, because we do spend a lot of money dealing with aquatic growth in our canal system, and with a shaded environment, there should be no reason why it won't decrease that, but we're really going to be interested in how much.
Very good. And when are you expecting Project Nexus to kick off?
We will be breaking ground after the irrigation season this year, so October-ish, November-ish this year.
Okay, very cool. And if any of our listeners would like to find out more about Project Nexus, they can check out our podcast episode 11 with Josh Weimer, who goes into detail about Project Nexus and what that is going to look like when it comes to fruition. So finally, let's talk a little bit more about future plans for regulating reservoirs. Are there more in TID's future?
There is at least one. We have fully designed another one at what we're calling lateral 5.5 regulating reservoir. It is at the end of lateral 5, but it is also in one of those unique locations where lateral 5.5 is very close to that location as well, so it can be served, and we have significant acreage downstream on lateral 5.5. Another reason why this is a key area in the district is because we have some capacity issues. There's some bridge culverts and some areas that kind of in peak season create a little bit longer than normal wait times in that area because of the capacity constraints. And this is also an area where we use significant amount of pumping down in this area, which leads to a water quality a little bit less than average in the district. And so this will fit directly in both of those. It will provide the supply to mitigate the capacity constraints. It will reduce pumping, which will improve water quality. Mm-hmm. And so we will be submitting for the same grant, and we're happy to say that the grant, I think we have an access to more of a grant than we did before. The previous maximum was $2 million, which we achieved on Series Main. And I believe I just heard that this one is $4.5 million potential.
Great.
And so that would be an excellent addition and really save our customers a lot of money.
So we'll keep our fingers crossed on that one. Very good. And then do you know yet what the footprint of the regulating reservoir at lateral 5.5 will look like? I
should have said that earlier. We have purchased a property. It's a 40-acre footprint and would be a 160-acre-foot capacity reservoir.
Very good. So it kind of fits right in between the other two size-wise.
Yep.
Okay, great. All right. So clearly these storage projects are an integral part of TID's overall irrigation system.
Absolutely. They seem to be almost like the key ingredients to, if you're putting a puzzle together that ends up with a closed system, these are the first puzzle pieces to put in, and then we work everything else around it by building TCC systems that lead up into them, by automating drops around them, and we just keep proliferating this vision into where we have zero spill.
All right. Well, I have noticed about TID that we are good at working on a problem until we get to that solution. So absolutely. I have no doubt they'll get the puzzle completed.
Me too.
All right. Well, Brad, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
We're now joined by Mike Kavarian, Water Distribution Department Manager for TID. This is your first time with us on the podcast, Mike. So let's get started with a little bit about your background.
I started October 7th, 1981, as an engineering aide with civil engineering. I started doing all the improvement district maps for the first 6 months I was here. At the time, they called them engineering aides. Now they are engineering technicians. In 1988, I was promoted to water records manager in water distribution. And then I was water records manager till 2006. 2006, I went to civil engineering as supervising engineering technician. And then 2008, came back to water distribution. And June 2010, I became water distribution department manager.
Okay. We spoke with Brad earlier about our regulating reservoirs, but we wanted to get the irrigation operations perspective from you. So from a high level, how do regulating reservoirs impact our irrigation operations?
We've always felt that a regulating reservoir was a start of new water for the district. And we've talked about regulating reservoirs for years throughout the district. Being a gravity system, we do have problems and issues with water being strong at nighttime, being short during the week or during the daylight hours. So regulating reservoirs basically provides us an opportunity to capture the water and then provide us with water later on during the day or at nighttime. So the benefits really becomes water savings. We can reduce spills. We control the water that is coming from the upper laterals. We can feed other parts within the system right from the reservoir. Basically, you've got water that doesn't go to the rivers. We capture it. So we capture up to 8 to 10,000 acre-feet with a series of reservoirs, which is what we believe. We can do that. And they also, we can start people sooner and have more efficiency with the water and keep customers more in a timely manner.
Okay, great. We've had water operations managers Seth Aldrich and Chris Rocha on the podcast in episode 23 to talk about irrigation operations, but let's quickly review how the system is operated, if you would.
Okay, so let's start at Don Pedro. So we started Don Pedro. Don Pedro, of course, is our reservoir that we utilize as our water supply. From Don Pedro, water goes through the LaGrange tunnel up of the main canal, goes through Dawson power plant, comes into Turlock Lake, which is our holding reservoir that we basically utilize for irrigation purposes. From there, it releases at Turlock Lake and meanders its way through the main canal, the Turlock Main, Ceres Main, Highline canals, and all those canals basically end up at the Merced River, Tuolumne River, or the San Joaquin Rivers. Okay.
And you mentioned earlier, our system is gravity fed. Tell us about some of the unique characteristics of a gravity-fed system.
I think one of the most unique situations, if you think about what they started doing back in the 20s when the old Don Pedro was built, we had our engineers stand up there and visualize that we will be able to run a gravity system from Don Pedro miles away to the rivers. So we're one of the few systems, I believe, through the state that is all gravity-fed. We gravity from Turlock Lake to San Joaquin River, Merced River, and the Tuolumne River without utilizing any pumping systems. It's all gravity fed. One of the problems with that is that you can't stop the water. That's why we have multiple spills throughout the system to protect the canal system. So if we have any issues, we have a way of getting rid of the water.
Okay. And you mentioned Turlock Lake. That's kind of the start of the irrigation system, or where water leaves Turlock Lake and then enters the irrigation system. What causes water to be released from Turlock Lake? What initiates that process? So
on a daily basis, we have irrigation customers who order water through our central call center, 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. on a daily basis, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day through the irrigation season. We release water at Turlock Lake depending on the water orders that we receive from the customers on a daily basis. And our WDOs collect those orders. They calculate how much water each of those service areas need. And then from there, they contact the call center with a request for the flow for the next business day.
Okay. So it's not until the demand for the water is there that water is released from Turlock Lake.
Correct. Everything is all dependent on the irrigation orders. And some days are very heavy, some days are very light, and we determine that flow from Turlock Lake regarding those irrigation flows.
Okay. So now, is there just a constant release from Turlock Lake, or are those done like as orders come in? How do they determine when water is released from Turlock Lake?
So throughout the years at Turlock Lake, there are two releases at Turlock Lake. One release is at 7 o'clock in the morning. That goes down the Turlock main side. Then we have a release at 10 o'clock in the morning, and that goes on the Ceres main side. And then after 10 o'clock, that flow remains consistent until the next morning at 7 a.m. And that's just how our system works, because it's an older system. It's all gravity fed again. The gates are manually operated, and we have to have people who bring the water in, move the water down the system.
Okay. All right. So if you would, I'd like you to kind of paint a visual picture for our listeners of what our irrigation system looks like, kind of what the layout is. Because you've mentioned, the main canal, the High Line, Turlock Lake. Can you kind of give us a east to west perspective of how the system is laid out?
Okay, so visually, if you look at Turlock Lake, it's on the furthest east of the district, up in the hills, up by past Hickman, up in that area. So we have the releases there that go into the main canal. Main canal goes west, and one of our first main canals is a High Line Canal, and that's at drop 7, and that goes through through Delhi into Lateral 8. Okay, that's the first main canal that we hit. That's got capacity about 325 CFS.
Okay, and that's on the easternmost side of the district.
Yes.
Okay.
Based on the eastern boundary of the district itself, the irrigation boundary.
Okay.
Then it goes through drop 9, which is at Hickman Lake Road, and then from there it goes through the division, and the division is the Ceres main and the Turlock main. So Turlock main goes from that point going south through Hilmar and into that. Most of those canals spill into the San Joaquin River. Then at the division, we go back to the division. Then we get the Ceres main that goes west to where the old Walmart is around Mitchell Road. And from there it turns south. And from there it goes south down to Hardin Road and it spills into our lateral 5 drain. So that's basically the outlay of the district. Then from each of those areas on the main canal, we've got upper laterals that go through from basically east to west, spill into the Ceres main. And then from the Ceres main, we have canals that are our lower laterals. They go from the Ceres main to the rivers, basically the San Joaquin River. And that's how our forefathers created the system. So everything goes into something. And the only thing you basically lose are the lower laterals, that water that ends up in the lower laterals.
Which, as you mentioned, is part of the reason why we're getting into these regulating reservoirs.
Exactly. It's a purpose of them because we over the years have spilled quite a bit of water throughout the system, and we've realized that it's inefficient and basically not a good use of the water.
Sure. And I know that's something that in recent years your team has put a lot of effort into, is minimizing those spills and making sure that we're maximizing all of the water we have.
Yes. And so during drought years, we have spills that range between 3.5% to 5%. And during heavy water years, when, of course, water's available, the spills are a little bit higher. But our goal always is to minimize the amount of water that's spilled through the district, because we know once it goes past our spills, we have no control of that water, and it's basically a waste to us.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so 250 miles of canals. What is the furthest distance that water will travel from Turlock Lake through our system?
So we basically have, I'm going to identify 3 locations. So one is the High Line Canal. So it goes from the main canal to drop 7 on the main canal, through the High Line Canal, High Line to lateral 8. That's 44 miles to the end of lateral 8.
Okay.
Then we have 2 other areas. We've got Turlock Lake to lateral 5.5, which is 40 miles, and then Turlock Lake to lateral 7, which is 40 miles. And we have a number of canals that are 30 to 35 miles long as far as from point A to point B.
Okay, that's quite a journey. All right, so let's get into a little bit more about the benefits that these regulating reservoirs provide for irrigation operations specifically. What can you tell us about some of those benefits?
Well, I think some of the benefits, as we step back and look at we start with lateral 8, right? And we've realized that what it does do is that it creates a more timely delivery of water. Definitely, we are able to save that water than going to the rivers, thousands of acre-feet on a yearly basis. We've also noticed that the water quality has improved through those areas, because we don't have to run deep well pumps or even TID drainage pumps in some situations. And I think it's just fast response time for customers in that regard.
Okay, since we're talking about lateral 8, let's just keep on with that and tell us a little bit about kind of the location, where it's located, and what some of those unique characteristics are to that area.
So lateral 8 is one of those locations that it's basically, when we start looking at putting reservoirs and putting total channel control and those kind of situations, we tried to find an area that was a smaller footprint than our other canal systems. And lateral 8 was kind of one of those areas where there was 13 drops. It serves a little over 2,500 irrigated acres. And the location of the pond or the reservoir is a location that would serve 2 laterals. Lateral 7 and lateral 8 are hundreds of feet apart. It's one of the few locations within the district that we have canals that are so close together. So this particular location was a perfect location for a reservoir because we could put water in from lateral 8 and put water in from lateral 7 and pull it out from both locations into those facilities. So what we've realized is, as we started looking at this whole process, is that the reservoir initially was only a 29 acre-foot reservoir. And we realized that there was a benefit to increasing the size because the 29 acre-feet was nice, but it really minimized the effectiveness of the spills and also the effectiveness of getting customers a better result in irrigation purposes. So what we did is they increased it from 29 acre-feet to 140 acre-feet. So what we do in that regard is that we have TCC on lateral 8, which kind of manages the whole system itself. Mm-hmm. So when the system is short, the pumps kick on lateral 8 or the pond, go into lateral 8. We serve our irrigation customers. That has increased the service on lateral 8 tremendously. We've been able to reduce those spills even at lateral 8 into Lower Stevenson to almost zero. We determine what can go through there, where we have spilled thousands of acre-feet through lateral 8 into Stevenson, so we don't do that anymore. The other benefit, and one of the bigger benefits we see really, is what it does to lateral 7. Lateral 7 is one of our heavily used canal systems. It normally maxes at 140 CFS for multiple times during the irrigation season. We have realized that once we use a pond, they can start people earlier, sometimes 18 to 24 hours earlier, which will minimize the amount of capacity within lateral 7. So again, it's also we've reduced groundwater pumping in both canals between 75 to 90%, which inside we've improved water quality in both those locations. Customers have not really complained about being short or long wait times like we used to have. So lateral 8 really proved that we could benefit from a pond if you put it in the right location and utilize it for the right reasons.
I want to double back to something you just mentioned, which is the approximately 90% reduction in groundwater pumping in the area of lateral 8. That was kind of an unexpected benefit of the regulating reservoir, was it not?
Well, in reality, we thought that lateral 8 was going to have more of an impact than lateral 7. Well, what we've realized that the first year that the pond was expanded, we started utilizing the water in lateral 7. Well, lateral 7 was where all of our pumping was. So we realized that once we started utilizing the reservoir for lateral 7, we were able to turn off all those pumps. Okay. So the 90% really was on lateral 7, not lateral 8, but in combination, we have about, again, 75 to 90% of groundwater pumping usage. But honestly, the unintended, definitely the lateral 7 was not what we were looking for. And we were very surprised. We're very happy that we've been able to utilize it for that regard.
And tell us a little bit more about why that's so important. What are the impacts of not using that groundwater versus using the surface water from the river? Well,
there's a couple of things. One of the big things for us is monetary. When we rent pumps from improvement district and private landowners, we pay these customers $8 an acre foot for all water pumped. We also pay for all the electricity that those pumps have to utilize to pump that water. And in some instances, it's thousands of dollars. So what we've realized is that we've reduced all that pumping, which means that we've saved the district money, which means we've saved our customers money because we don't have to worry about those M&O costs any longer. Number one. Number two, we've got the water quality aspect of it. Some of these pumps are not the best water quality. I mean, they're fine, but the district surface water is much better. And at that time, we can give people better water throughout that lower system. So those are the two.
Largely because of the salts that are just naturally in the ground where the water is being pumped from. Is that right?
Well, some of these soils are alkali soils.
Okay.
And there's also nutrients. There's sodium issues, there's chlorine, there's a number of constituents that are in the groundwater wells that sometimes are not the best for our crops. So what we've found out is that, again, we've got cleaner water because most of this water is from the Tuolumne River. Mm-hmm. So it's all better quality. So we really have, I think, added a benefit to our customers by these ponds.
Okay, very good. And how many growers or acres would you say benefit from the lateral 8 regulating reservoir?
If we look at the lateral 7 and lateral 8, total is about 13,000 acres. We do have other benefits. We have benefits on lateral 6 that feeds lateral 7. That's another 10,000 acres that we could potentially utilize the pond for. But if we look at a direct benefit, it's lateral 7 and lateral 8, and those are about 13,000 acres.
And then in addition to the benefits to that acreage, I'm hearing you talk about just the flexibility that this seems to offer you, being able to move water from one lateral to the next or take pressure off of one system because you can move that water around.
So what we've realized is that lateral 6 basically is the bottom end of the Turlock main. So when the Turlock main is strong, it goes to lateral 6. Well, some of that water in the past has gone to the rivers. Well, now when we have a strong lateral 6 is strong, we can put that water in lateral 7 and in turn put it in the pond if there's room in the pond. So we've been able to save water in that regard too, by saving the water that's going to the rivers. So again, all the benefit that we really, and one thing you have, when you get a reservoir, you don't know the benefits until you start using them. Mm-hmm. And we now have been using this one for 5, 6, 7 years, and almost every year we find a different benefit to it.
Wow, that's great. Fantastic. Okay, which is part of the reason why the district decided that a second reservoir was a good idea. So now they have installed or built the Series Main reservoir. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Okay, so we've in the past have talked about multiple reservoirs throughout the system. We always try to look at the most opportunistic locations we can that would give us the biggest bang for the cost. So one of the locations we've looked at over the years is the Series Main Reservoir. And the Series Main, when we looked at this one at drop 21 and lower lateral 3, that's a prime example because that's where we have a number of things that end up and the things that start. Drop 21, where the Series Main Reservoir is, that's always been an issue because we've always had water that's come down from the upper laterals, and sometimes we just can't control all of it because there's too much of it. So what this pond does, what this reservoir does, it basically put all that water in that location. So for us, we've hoped that this is one of those locations that we've been able to put in. The property became available a few years ago. The location, again, is a good location where we had it. So it benefits multiple canals and multiple customers.
Okay. And can you tell us a little bit about, the reservoir can receive water from which laterals? It can put water back into which laterals?
Okay. So on this particular one, water can be received from Series Main Canal. It can only be received from Series Main Canal. Everything from the Series Main can be gravity fed. So there's no pumping that needs to be done, putting water into the pond. That particular pond is a 220 acre-foot reservoir. And I'm sorry, but identifying pond and reservoir, they're kind of interchangeable. But there's 220 acre-foot. So there's 100 CFS capacity that goes into the pond. And in some instances, when we're strong on the Series side, or we have 2 upper laterals that come into the Series Main, upper 2 and upper 2.5. When those spill, that water can also be put into the pond anytime during the day. So we have that situation that we can put water in gravity, but we have to pump it out to the Series Main or lower lateral 3.
So it sounds like the location of the Series Main regulating reservoir, it touches a lot more laterals maybe than the lateral 8 regulating reservoir, which was kind of specific to lateral 7 and 8, whereas Series Main, it seems like there's even more flexibility with that regulating reservoir.
Yeah, so on the Series Main side, reality, anything from drop 14 and basically Metro Road and Series Main downstream to Hardin Road can be affected by the pond. So the Series Main reservoir itself can basically feeds lower lateral 3 directly, feeds the series main from 1221 downstream, feeds lower lateral 4 and lateral 4.5 directly. But it has benefits where lateral 1, lower 2.5, and lower 2, which are north of the pond, can also be fed earlier from gravity water coming down the series main, and then we would replace the water from the pond back into the lower laterals, so we'd be able to use that benefit. So in reality, anything on the series main side is benefited by this reservoir.
Okay, very good. And approximately how many acres would you say that is? How many acres benefit from the series main regulating reservoir?
Directly about 25,000 if we look at lower lateral 3, the series main part of it below 21, lower 4, and lower 4.5. Those are the direct benefit. The other ones are another 20,000 acres, give or take, that would get the indirect benefit from the pond.
Okay, fantastic. Mike, you told us earlier about some of the benefits that pertain specifically to the lateral 8 regulating reservoir. Tell us about some of the benefits of the series main regulating reservoir.
In reality, the series main has a greater effect because there's more pumps that may be affected than lateral 8.
Okay.
So we've got lower lateral 3, lower 4, and lower 4.5 that we have a number of rented pumps. The capacity of the reservoir is 100 CFS. Each of the pumps are 25 CFS that can be pumped into the series main or lower lateral 3. So what we've identified is that basically that's 5 rented pumps per pump coming out of the series main.
Wow.
So it's a greater impact financially for the district, greater impact for the customers regarding water quality. We can irrigate more people because with 100 CFS, you can start, if each irrigation head is a 15 CFS head, you can start 6 heads at one time and irrigate people for a 24-hour period and not touch any other water with the pond. So all those are all at advantages, a huge advantage to the series side.
Okay, so when we spoke to Brad earlier, he mentioned that the next regulating reservoir will be near lateral 5.5. What do you anticipate the benefits of that reservoir to be?
So lateral 5.5 basically is going to benefit lateral 5.5 only, but lateral 5.5 has had capacity concerns, has had water quality issues, and from that location, we believe we can save about 3,000 to 5,000 acre-feet, and that water would come from the Hardin drain, which is the end of the series main extension, which is below the pond. There are areas below the pond that we can't capture the water. That water will definitely go into the Hardin drain, and also lateral 5 goes into the Hardin drain. So all that water we'd be able to put into the pond. Also, lateral 5.5, we usually run water around Morgan Road because Morgan Road is a capacity concern. So we can put water again in the pond at that location. So there's a number of things that pond, that reservoir would basically affect. About 1,500 to 2,000 acres below the pond on the 5.5, and definitely improve water quality down that location also.
Okay, great. So, Mike, you've been with TID for nearly 42 years. That's a pretty significant history. How have irrigation operations changed since you started with the district?
Well, when I started, I was 19. And I remember talking to the old water distribution department managers, water operations guys. One of the things that we used to call them canal tenders. Now they're called water distribution operators. So the canal tenders all lived within their beats. We had 36 beats throughout the district, and each of them had their own house, TID furnished house. What they did is that they used to take water orders 3 times a day, in the morning and at noon at night. That was the only time the customers could order water. So they basically took orders that way. That's how they served their customers. They ordered water the same way. They ordered water through not a call center, but through a water master. Brought water out of Turlock Lake. That we do it the same way we do it today. But a lot of things have changed. So in 1991, we went to a central call center. We changed the name from canal tender to water distribution operators. They were no longer required to live on their beat. We increased almost every service area. We almost doubled to almost tripled the size of all the service areas. We went from basically 35 individual service areas to 15. And average acreage is between 10 to 12,000 acres. And now we have shifts that are 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., and then 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. So that was a big change from where the district was previously. So that happened in 1991. 1997, basically we started putting our first SCADA systems in. We have 6 locations in some of our main areas.
And tell us briefly what SCADA is.
There's a couple ways of looking at it. The intent of SCADA is to control water. Well, the way we've used SCADA initially was to measure water and to identify it on a computer system so we knew where the water was throughout our system. Before then, our WOs would have to go out there and drive to other locations and find out what water was spilling, what the heads were, what the locations were of the water. So what SCADA did for us is it provided us data on a computer, on our cell phones, to identify where the water was. Now, as we've gone on in the 2015 to 17 years, we started identifying to where now we can control the water through our tablets and through our desktops. So now we're starting the base of the SCADA part of things, so where we can start utilizing the data and also controlling the water through our SCADA system. We increased it back in 2013 and 14, went to a brand new system. We started adding multiple sites. We have over 400 sites now throughout the system. We started with 6, again, in 1997.
Wow.
We now have 400. In 2015, we added slip meters and flue meters, basically because of SBX 7-7, and that was a state requirement to measure water more efficiently and more timely. So we did that, and we have those throughout the system, and we can operate those gates through our tablets. We did that part of it, and we started getting our WO tablets, iPhones, and I was never a big fan of iPhones, but honestly, I've realized that they work really well, especially on the tech side of things. And we have online water ordering now. That's something that we've never thought that we would do. Right now, our customers use it about 45% of the time. So we are slowly but surely, as we're changing the dynamics and the demographics of our customers, they are now going to the online water ordering system. About a year or so ago, we started looking at electronic water scheduling. Our WDOs have started doing that. We have our staff who has gone through and created it on Excel and spreadsheets with IT's help. And now we do things like electronically. We used to use fax machines back in the day.
A what now? What?
Yeah. In some instances, people don't understand fax machines, but that's when you're old school like I am. Fax machine was the thing back then. You were somebody who had a fax machine. But we don't do fax machines. We don't do emails anymore. We do everything. We do queries where our WDOs hit a button and all of a sudden everything's updated. They put irrigation times in their spreadsheet. They push another button that says bill. It goes to another one of our databases, and all they have to do is check them off. So we've reduced a lot of mistakes that we had in the past. So all those things have occurred from where we started back in the 80s to where we are today. And it really is amazing from my perspective, looking at what our staff has done and where we are as a district.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of changes from living there and having to have eyes on the water at all times to know what was happening to this new movement in technology, which it seems like makes things a lot more efficient for your team.
It's more efficient. It also gives us more of a timely manner of where the water is.
Sure.
People ask questions. If there's any issues, we can go back and look at trends so we can follow that water through the district. When we have breaks, we can identify sometimes where those breaks are and when they've occurred. So overall, I'm a big fan of how the district has improved and how we have adapted to life at the district. And it's really impressive.
Very cool. Well, Mike, a lot of that has happened under your leadership. So thank you for everything that you've brought to the district over your 42 years. And we look forward to having you around for the next 42.
All we can do is hope. But thank you very much. I do appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us, Mike.
Thank you very much.
This concludes part 1 of the TID Water and Power Podcast episode on regulating reservoirs. Part 2 is available now in our podcast feed, where we continue the conversation with Senior Civil Engineer Matt Hazen and Construction and Maintenance Department Manager Chris Hardin.